The woman hovered beside his table, not quite stepping into his space, yet close enough that he could feel the quiet heat of her presence. The cafe around them hummed with ordinary life, cups clinking, milk steaming, soft music tangled with distant laughter. But her voice slipped through it all, thin and fragile as if it might break if spoken any louder. "Can we share your fries, sir?" Her words trembled at the edges. One hand pulled her worn coat tighter around her body. The other rested protectively on her son's shoulder. The boy peeked out from behind her, his small fingers clutching the fabric, blue eyes locked on the plate in front of the man like it was a miracle he wasn't allowed to believe in. The billionaire froze. His hand hung in the air just inches above a golden fry, the glossy surface of his expensive watch catching the cafe lights. He had faced boardrooms full of ruthless men without a single flicker of doubt, but now his chest tightened in a way he didn't recognize. He looked at her more closely, the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the quiet shame she tried to hide, the way her lips pressed together as if she was already preparing for rejection. This wasn't begging. It was bravery dressed as politeness, pride cracking for the sake of a child. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the three of them. He felt the weight of her request not as a loss, but as a question aimed straight at his soul. Would he see her, or would he look away like everyone else? And for the first time in a very long time, money, power, and status meant nothing compared to a little boy's hungry stare and a mother's whispered hope. He studied the child's trembling fingers, the tiny knuckles pale from where he had been gripping his mother's coat as if it were the last safe thing in the world. The boy tried to look brave, tried to stand still, but hunger betrayed him in the smallest ways. A swallow that came too quickly, a soft lick of his lips, eyes that kept drifting back to the plate no matter how hard he fought the urge. The man felt something twist inside him, sharp and sudden, like the reopening of an old scar he never let heal. Slowly, carefully, he slid the plate across the wooden table toward them. The scrape of porcelain against wood sounded louder than it should have, cutting straight through the cafe's background noise. In that small movement, memories he had buried under years of success clawed their way up. A rainy evening outside a shop window, his small self staring at warm bread through the glass, pockets empty, stomach aching, pride heavier than his bones. He remembered the way people looked through him back then, as if he were part of the wall. Now he was on the other side of the table. The power had quietly shifted, and instead of triumph, it made his chest ache. He watched the boy's face light up, a smile breaking through like sunrise after a long, cold night. It hit him harder than any business victory ever had. In that moment, it wasn't about fries at all. It was about being seen when the world had decided you were invisible. And he felt, for the first time in years, that he could change how a story like that ended. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely more than a breath. But they carried the weight of weeks she had spent pretending she was fine. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the edge of the plate, then hesitated as if even touching. It felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, fighting the tears with a quiet, stubborn strength. She refused to cry in front of a stranger, especially one who had just given her something that felt far too generous for a handful of food. The boy's hand hovered over the fries, tiny fingers suspended in the air. He looked up at his mother, silently asking if it was really okay. That simple glance cracked something inside the man. Children shouldn't have to ask for permission to eat. Children shouldn't understand hunger this way. When the billionaire saw that silent question on the boy's face, he gently pushed the plate closer, an unspoken answer passing between them. "They're yours," he said, his voice rough, uneven, surprised by the emotion rising in his own throat. For a brief second, the woman forgot how to breathe. That one sentence ripped open a door in her that she'd sealed shut long ago. To kindness, to trust, to the dangerous idea that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. The boy finally picked up a fry and took a small bite, chewing slowly like he wanted the moment to last. The man watched him, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest, a feeling that both terrified and grounded him at the same time. The sudden buzz of her phone shattered the fragile stillness that had settled between them. The screen lit up on the rough wood of the table, vibrating in short, angry bursts. The name across it impossible to ignore. The landlord. 5 missed calls stacked like a silent accusation. She stared at it for half a second too long. And in that moment, the truth slipped through the careful mask she had been wearing. Fear tightened her features, drew her shoulders in, made her look smaller than she already was. She flipped the phone face down, as if that alone could make the problem disappear. But the tension stayed in the air, thick and suffocating. Her jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin, determined line, pretending it was nothing. The boy, sensing the shift, leaned closer to her, his tiny body instinctively seeking protection. The man saw it all, the fatigue, the quiet panic, the way her whole life seemed to balance on a thin, invisible thread that was ready to snap at any moment. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his eyes to meet hers. The warm softness between them sharpened into something urgent. "Are you safe tonight?" he asked, keeping his voice low, gentle enough not to scare her, but firm enough to tell her he already knew the answer. The cafe noise faded again, and all that remained was the silent, terrifying pause that stretched out before she could respond. She held his gaze, and in that single, stretched moment, every carefully built wall inside her began to crumble. The cafe lights blurred, the chatter around them dulling into a distant echo. But the question remained sharp and painfully real. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her coat, knuckles whitening as if she could squeeze stability out of thin air. For years she had learned how to lie with a soft smile, how to say "I'm fine" until the words had lost all meaning. But something about the way he looked at her, steady, present, unafraid to see the truth, made the lie stick in her throat. "No." Her answer came out softer than a confession, yet heavier than a scream. One word, shaking but honest. It hung between them, thick with danger, with late-night streets and locked doors and nowhere safe to land. The boy stopped chewing, sensing the shift again, his eyes flicking between the two adults, sensing something important was happening that he didn't fully understand. A slow, silent breath left the man's chest. This was no longer about food, no longer about a simple moment of kindness. The world he knew of contracts, numbers, and power felt distant, irrelevant. In front of him was a truth that demanded something deeper. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice even more, as if shielding them from the rest of the world. "Then don't leave tonight," he said quietly. The words weren't dramatic. They were certain. In his mind, alarms should have gone off. Every rule about safety, distance, and logic. But instead there was only clarity. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating risk or profit. He was listening to a voice he had ignored for too long, the one that remembered being cold, forgotten, and hungry. And as he looked from the frightened mother to the innocent child, he felt a connection tighten, invisible but unbreakable, like fate finally calling his name and refusing to be ignored. She didn't ask what he meant by "don't leave tonight." The answer was already written in the way he looked at her. Steady, unflinching, almost desperate to protect something he had only just found. He rose from his chair, and the small movement drew a quiet line through the space between their two lives. With a discreet nod to the waiter, he settled the bill without ever glancing at it, as if numbers had suddenly lost their language. A moment later, another plate was placed on the table, fuller this time, steam curling upward in tender, visible waves. The boy's eyes widened, a soft sound of amazement escaping his lips before he clamped it shut, still half afraid that too much happiness might be taken away. A cup of hot tea appeared beside her hands. She stared down at it, her fingers hovering over the warm porcelain without touching it, as though it might vanish if she believed in it too soon. The warmth reached her before the cup ever did, seeping into her frozen skin, loosening a tension that had lived in her bones for too long. She swallowed hard, overwhelmed by such a simple act, a warm drink, a full plate, the quiet reassurance that someone had chosen to see her. Across from her, his heart pounded for reasons that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. He watched the way her shoulders slowly lowered, the way her breath deepened for the first time since she had entered the cafe. It hit him then with terrifying clarity. He didn't want to walk away. Not from her tired eyes, not from the boy's cautious smile, not from this moment that felt heavier than coincidence. He felt exposed, stripped of the cold armor he had spent years perfecting. And strangely, it felt like relief. Outside, the evening had thickened into a cold, sharp night, the kind that made every shadow stretch longer, every step echo against empty streets. Yet she didn't feel the chill when he draped his coat around her shoulders, careful to avoid touching her skin, as if even the smallest contact could carry a promise too heavy to bear. The warmth settled instantly, not just from the fabric but from the thought behind it. A quiet declaration that she and her child were seen, protected and not alone. She held the coat against her chest, tasting the rare, fragile comfort, and her eyes lifted to meet his. Gratitude and disbelief warred there, fragile and raw. He walked beside them, not ahead, not behind, adjusting his pace so it matched their cautious steps. The streetlights cast a soft glow, painting long shadows across the sidewalk, and in those shadows, he felt the weight of responsibility settle over him, heavier than any business deal he had ever carried. His chest tightened, a mixture of fear, hope, and something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Tonight," he said softly, voice low, carrying both certainty and care, "you don't have to be alone." The words hung between them, simple yet immense, a lifeline offered without expectation, without condition. She swallowed, tears threatening but caught on the edge of her lashes, and the boy squeezed her hand, sensing the shift in the world around them, sensing the rare safety that had slipped into their lives like sunlight through storm clouds. In that quiet night, under the dim amber glow of the streetlights, fear loosened its grip, leaving space for hope to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, all three of them, mother, child, and stranger-turned-guardian, walked forward together, bound not by obligation or circumstance, but by the fragile, undeniable truth of human connection. The city around them continued its noise, its rush, its indifferent spin, but in their small, shared world, there was stillness, warmth, and the beginning of something that felt like a second chance.